This is really an ambitious part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to rewrite the curriculum. Rewrite the curriculum because, well, the curriculum for who? For bureaucrats, for civil servants, but again, for anyone who's going to be working with the state. Why do we need to rewrite it? Because economic theory, which informs so much policymaking, has unfortunately, in a very narrow way, informed policy, and hence state organizations themselves, how they think about their role, as though it's really at best about fixing a market failure. There's a whole rigorous approach about that called market failure theory. It shouldn't be thrown out, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but it really needs to be complemented by what we call market shaping and market co-creating. And why is that? Well, if you look historically at the role that the state has played when it has actually been successful in transforming economies, whether it's bringing about the ICT revolution or setting up the welfare state, or today basically trying to foster a green transition, it's very hard to look at that as simply a set of different bandages fixing either positive externalities or negative externalities. It actually required a bold ambition, what we often call a mission, and also rethinking the tools of policymaking to foster that change. And again, that change often being one that requires different types of partnerships. So whether we look at procurement policy, grants, loans, different types of subsidies, these are all different levers that governments have. And we're very interested in rethinking how those levers can be used to foster transitions, whether it be the green transition or all the different types of investments and activities that are required to help us solve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that countries worldwide have signed up to.
I think it's important to emphasize this is a multidisciplinary course. So if you come and study with us, you're getting economics, politics, organization studies, and design. So bringing all of those disciplines together. And then the general course structure really moves from these core foundations, these core theories, towards practice, where you're applying it to a policy document, a policy thesis, or you're actually entering an organization and interacting with them. So multidisciplinary, and then with this move from theory to practice.
And in terms of the way we set up our teaching program, as Kate was saying before, this is truly interdisciplinary program. And so we have both academics like ourselves doing teaching, but we had also a lot of people from practice in terms of either people who have been or are at the moment working in civil service or policymakers, but also people who are somewhere in between academe, policy. So people from various walks of life, like for instance, systems designers, people who do work for think tanks, policymakers, politicians. So we had a lot of various faculty, I think, doing the teaching as well, and that's really again the strength of being very interdisciplinary. And of course, this was also something for us as a challenge, I think, initially. How do you keep a coherent, if you will, story through a module going by including so many different angles, but also by including different perspectives in terms of academic practitioners. So how do you keep the academic and theoretical and conceptual discussion going, and at the same time apply it constantly and also constantly be questioned by practice, which I think was the most interesting bit, perhaps. How do theories and practice tend to clash quite often? So yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think another thing that adds coherence to the course and maybe sets it apart from other MPAs or MPP programs is I think it's got a real sort of heart to it, a real interest in these values like public value, missions, participation. There's a real set of tools or ideas that we emphasize around things like transformative change that I think is distinctive from a maybe more traditional policy program or public administration program. And so these questions of public value, how is it generated, how is it measured, I think is a thread that runs through not only the first module, but all the modules. And then you see it coming out in the analysis that students are doing in their placements. And so there's some sort of core beats, core ideas, missions, creativity, entrepreneurship, innovation that really bring sort of a coherence to the course despite the diversity. And then these core ideas are being refracted through these different disciplinary lenses. What kind of organization do you need to drive innovation? What is the political economy of innovation? These kind of questions keep things together and really attract students who are interested in those questions and those problems.
And I think what was really interesting for our first year was, well, not interesting, of course, it is also tragic that COVID-19 happened. And it was right after our term 2. So students had basically done all the sort of classroom work, and now they were ready to go into the world and to the placements. And then COVID happened. And I think what we realized very quickly, and then students as well, is that, the things that we are talking about, agile and responsive public sector, innovative public sector, creative public sector, but at the same time also, of course, very skillful and resilient public sector were exactly put on or became really the key topics of the next months, and are still today. Of course, we are now again, of course, facing quite massive lockdowns probably across the world. So all those skills, how actually governments are dealing with these kind of massive crises, how they're able to basically source in and build capabilities inside, and also work with industry and various actors, I think is something that is really at the heart of our MPA. And this was right away put to test. So we had students who went to local London councils. They had to work with teams who are actually dealing with the crisis on day-to-day basis. So they put into practice a lot of the skills that they just a few weeks ago had learned in transformation by design course. So how do you do user research? How do you actually find out the needs of the people that was actually drastically increasing day by day in terms of how do they get the medication, people who need food. So this was, for our students, I think it was a really great experience, of course, in quotation marks, because it was also at the same time tragic, but it proved, I think, that what we do with our MPA is really what governments need today.
The critiques that we have of governments, or concerns that we have with governments that are raised in the early modules, I think became illustrated. These failings of the current system, the dangers of inequality, the dangers of unequal access to health, to protections. These really came to light. So, they were really illustrated. So I think that was an interesting point of COVID. And then also this need or this demand for alternative ways of thinking, alternative ways of governing. And so I felt like the MPA has really been built around this question. And then the question was posed in this very dramatic way by the COVID-19 crisis. So I think a lot of what IIPP has been doing is providing a different way forward, an alternative to austerity, an alternative to privatization, and that these are really the core themes now. So the sort of the relevance and necessity of this course, I think, have really been proven by this crisis, and this really speaks to these issues.